The Untold Story of the Clone Wars, the galaxy's most pivotal war. Chapter 1. The Spark Before the Fire. The Clone Wars did not ignite from a single spark. It was a slow-burning fuse laid by decades of political rot, corporate corruption, and the growing weight of a crumbling galactic bureaucracy. This is not the tale of noble Jedi and sinister Sith. It is the story of a galaxy fraying at the seams, told through the forgotten voices of those who saw the storm long before it broke. Cracks in the Republic. At the heart of galactic governance stood the Republic, an institution older than most civilizations within it. By the time of Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum's administration, however, it was a government paralyzed by bureaucracy and riddled with special interests. For centuries, the Galactic Senate had relied on diplomacy and trade to unify star systems, but by the final decades of the Republic, it had become something else entirely, a talking chamber controlled by megacorporations and political dynasties. Taxation of trade routes, endless lobbying, and vetoes stifled reform. Planets in the Outer Rim, long neglected and exploited, began to grow resentful. Senator Asker Ak of Malastare once declared, "The Republic is not broken, it is simply overwhelmed." But the truth was more dire. Worlds in the Outer Rim felt like vassals to core worlds that grew fat on trade profits and bloated military contracts. This growing dissatisfaction would form the foundation of the movement that came next. Count Dooku and the Separatist Spark. Count Dooku of Sereno, once a respected Jedi Master, resigned from the Jedi Order, disillusioned by its alliance with a corrupt Republic. He was not alone. Others had seen the hypocrisy. How Jedi were forced to serve a Senate beholden to commerce over compassion. Dooku's transformation into the political leader of the Separatist movement was not immediate. He first disappeared from public view, allegedly retreating to Sereno to reflect. But sources suggest Dooku was already meeting with influential business leaders and disaffected senators years before his public reappearance as the charismatic voice of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, CIS. To Outer Rim worlds, Dooku was a liberator. He spoke of sovereignty, fair trade, and liberation from core world interference. To the Republic, he was a dangerous demagogue. Behind the scenes, Dooku's rise was far more orchestrated. Unknown to most at the time, he was already Darth Tyrannus, apprentice to Darth Sidious. The Separatist cause, noble in appearance, was engineered to fracture the Republic from within, playing both sides in a grand design. By 22 BBY, over 10,000 systems had declared their intent to leave the Republic. The corporations that built an army. The Confederacy of Independent Systems wasn't just a coalition of rebellious planets. It was fueled and funded by some of the most powerful organizations in the galaxy. The Techno-Union, led by Wat Tambor, supplied droid intelligence and mechanical systems. Their factories on planets like Skako Minor could churn out battle droids by the millions. But Tambor's motivations weren't ideological. He sought control of independent manufacturing and profit from wartime innovation. The banking clan, headquartered on Munalinst and governed by the cold and calculating San Hill, funneled credits into the Separatist war chest. They financed the production of war machines, planetary takeovers, and even espionage networks, hedging their bets on a galactic realignment that would leave them richer than ever. The Commerce Guild and Corporate Alliance, meanwhile, mobilized fleets of commerce vessels and security forces under the pretext of protecting their trade interests. What they truly desired was deregulation and expansion without Republic oversight. These corporations had seats in the Separatist Council, turning the Confederacy into a hybrid of rebellion and profiteering syndicate. As Dooku made impassioned speeches about justice and independence, his counselors calculated profit margins. Kamino, the Silent Storm. In the shadows of the storm, on the storm-drenched world of Kamino, a different kind of preparation was taking place. One that the Jedi knew nothing about. 10 years before the war, Jedi Master Sivo Dyas foresaw a great conflict approaching. Without Senate approval, he secretly commissioned a clone army from the Kaminoans, financed by unknown backers later revealed to be under the influence of Darth Sidious. The Kaminoans, secretive and hyper-efficient, began cloning a template provided by a bounty hunter, Django Fett. Their bioengineering excellence produced millions of genetically identical soldiers, engineered for obedience, programmed for loyalty, and grown at accelerated rates. The Jedi Council remained unaware of the army's existence for years. Sifal Dyas, who could have explained its origins, was mysteriously killed. In his place, Darth Tyrannus oversaw the project's continuation, an army created in the name of the Republic, without its consent and shaped by Sith intent. The Kaminoans accepted this manipulation with characteristic detachment. As Prime Minister Lama Su later explained to Obi-Wan Kenobi, "We were contracted to produce a clone army for the Republic. No mention of who placed the order or why, just a transaction." Voices from the margins. Amid this storm of duplicity and ambition, the voices of neutral systems, pacifist senators, and border world leaders struggled to be heard. Senator Mina Bonteri of Onderon stood as a rare beacon of integrity among the Separatists. A former ally of Padme Amidala, Bonteri advocated for peaceful negotiation rather than conflict. She led the Separatist Parliament, a lesser-known civilian body within the CIS that sought diplomatic solutions to the Republic's failures. Her assassination, later blamed on Republic forces but likely orchestrated by Dooku, silenced a path to peace. Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan, though loyal to the Republic, frequently challenged its drift toward militarism. "This body is no longer the voice of the people," he lamented. "It is the hand of war." His proposed resolutions for diplomacy were often shouted down. Meanwhile, leaders from neutral systems like Mandalore, Naboo, and Chandrila tried desperately to form a middle path. Duchess Satine Kryze of Mandalore led a pacifist government, refusing to take a side in the war. A people long known for warrior culture were divided, some inspired by her vision, others resentful of her restraint. On countless Outer Rim worlds, local leaders expressed concern not about the coming war, but about the consequences. Who would be left standing when the war machines rolled back? What would happen to planets with no strategic value? The Republic and Separatists both made promises, but it was unclear who would honor them. Fire ignites. By the time the Jedi Council discovered the clone army and war broke out on Geonosis, the galaxy had already been maneuvered into conflict. The seeds had been planted not by ideology or necessity, but by manipulation, Sith manipulation. The people of the Republic did not vote for war. The Separatist worlds did not ask for servitude. But both sides were played, like sabacc pieces in a Sith game stretching across decades. In the background, Darth Sidious smiled behind a senator's mask. Dooku whispered lies in Separatist ears, and a clone army stood ready, obedient, uniform, and unaware of the dark command buried deep within their minds. The fire had been lit, and the Clone Wars began. Chapter 2. Birth of the Grand Army. The sudden arrival of a fully formed clone army at the Battle of Geonosis shocked the galaxy. It was hailed as a miracle of foresight, a defensive measure set in motion by a wise Jedi long before the crisis reached its peak. But beneath that orderly facade was a tale woven from secrecy, manipulation, and ethical compromise. The birth of the Grand Army of the Republic was not a triumph. It was a mystery, and as the war began, few paused to question the implications of its creation. A conspiracy in silence. The Republic, for all its legislative grandeur, never authorized the creation of an army. The Military Creation Act had been debated endlessly but stalled under pressure from pacifist factions and wary senators. Then, seemingly from nowhere, the Jedi discovered that a fully operational army, numbering in the millions, was already in production on a planet called Kamino. This army had been ordered by Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, a respected member of the High Council known for his visions of galactic upheaval. Separatist believed the Republic would soon face a large-scale threat and that it was woefully unprepared. His proposal to create a standing army was rejected. Undeterred, he acted alone. Or so the story went. In reality, Separatist's order was hijacked almost immediately. Darth Sidious, operating behind the scenes, instructed his new apprentice, Count Dooku, now Darth Tyrannus, to eliminate Separatist and take control of the project. The Kaminoans, uninterested in politics, never questioned the change in oversight. The order was paid for, the template provided, production continued. This act, the secret commissioning of an army, violated everything the Jedi stood for. Yet when Obi-Wan Kenobi discovered the clone facilities and war erupted on Geonosis, the Jedi had no choice. The Grand Army was deployed under their command. They never asked why it existed. Django, Fett, the template. At the core of every clone stood the DNA of one man, Django Fett. A Mandalorian by birth, mercenary by trade, Fett was a legend in the underworld. Known for his lethal efficiency and unshakable honor, he had survived countless conflicts from the Battle of Galidran to numerous skirmishes in the Outer Rim. When approached by Tyrannus to serve as the genetic source of a new army, he accepted, but on his terms. Fett demanded a single, unaltered clone as payment, a son. He named the boy Boba. To the Kaminoans, Django was a perfect specimen, physically superior, mentally resilient, and entirely detached from political ideology. He had no loyalty to the Republic nor interest in galactic affairs. For them, he was biology. But Django's involvement also served a deeper purpose. His training of the Kaminoan instructors and his supervision of the early clone batches gave the army a lethal edge. He taught them more than marksmanship. He instilled the cold pragmatism of a survivor. That DNA, both literal and philosophical, would shape the entire army's identity. Years later, his death at the hands of Mace Windu would mark the beginning of the Jedi's descent from guardians to targets. The Kaminoans, science without sympathy. Kamino, an ocean world battered by unceasing storms, was home to one of the most advanced genetic engineering societies in the galaxy. Towering spire cities floated above the violent seas, and within them, sterile silver halls echoed with the sound of cloning vats and data terminals. The Kaminoans viewed cloning not as science, but as art. To them, individuality was a flaw. They valued efficiency, obedience, and predictability. La Masu, Prime Minister of Kamino, once remarked, "We are proud of our product. Not soldiers, not men, product." Their understanding of ethics was shaped by practicality. The clones were tools designed for a specific purpose. If one batch underperformed, it was terminated. Experimental mutations were catalogued and evaluated for utility. Even the loss of 1,000,000 units was seen as an acceptable setback if it furthered the perfection of the next generation. The Jedi, who held life sacred, found little comfort in this outlook, but said nothing. War was coming, and the Republic needed soldiers. What mattered now was that the Kaminoans could deliver, and they did. Training for war. From their earliest days in the growing chambers, clones were subjected to rigorous conditioning. Flash learning implants gave them knowledge of tactics, weapons, languages, and Republic law. Physical training began as soon as motor function allowed. Instructors, some hired from Mandalorian mercenaries, oversaw combat drills, survival scenarios, and simulated war zones. The goal was not to teach them to think creatively, but to follow orders with lethal efficiency. Yet some clones, particularly the ARC troopers, advanced recon commandos, were different. These elite units were less genetically inhibited. They retained more of Django Fett's aggression, autonomy, and personality. Trained personally by Fett himself, the ARC troopers were designed to operate independently of the command structure. In theory, they were to be deployed in special circumstances, far from Jedi oversight. Clone Commandos, another specialized group, were trained in squad tactics. Each unit of 4 was bonded through shared experience and rigorous loyalty trials. They were given advanced gear, stealth training, and Black Ops assignments. Names like Delta Squad and Omega Squad would echo in whispered reports long after battles had ended. Some batches were experimental, tweaked for enhanced strength, intelligence, or environmental resistance. Others developed quirks. Clone CT-5555, later known as Fives, became infamous for his growing suspicion of the chain of command and would play a key role in unraveling the truth behind Order 66. Despite efforts to control identity, individuality crept in. Clones began to name themselves, they customized their armor, they formed opinions. In time, they became more than soldiers, they became brothers. Geonosis, the first deployment. When Obi-Wan Kenobi tracked a bounty hunter to Geonosis and uncovered a massive droid foundry, the Republic was forced into action. The Jedi, despite their reluctance, accepted command of the clone army and deployed it immediately. The Battle of Geonosis marked the first large-scale engagement of the Clone Wars. The clone army arrived in low-orbit gunships, thundering across the rust-colored plains as Separatist droid forces mobilized. What unfolded was a chaotic, brutal introduction to modern warfare. Tactically, the clones outperformed expectations. Their discipline, coordination, and advanced tech allowed them to reclaim key objectives. The use of LEAT/I gunships, ATT walkers, and orbital support showcased the Republic's superior battlefield logistics. Yet the battle was not a clean victory. Many Jedi were unprepared for the realities of war. Over 200 Jedi died in the arena and subsequent fighting, losses not seen in millennia. Commanders were forced to adapt mid-battle and clone losses were severe. Some battalions were wiped out entirely in ill-planned frontal assaults. But Geonosis sent a message. The Republic was no longer pacifist. It had teeth. For the clones, Geonosis was not just a first battle, it was a proving ground. And a graveyard. Thousands of them fell, nameless and unremembered, in service of a republic they had never chosen to defend. Yet they fought, without hesitation, because it was what they were born to do. The Grand Army Marches. In the days following Geonosis, the Jedi stood before holographic maps, planning warfronts across the galaxy. Republic military production soared, clone training facilities expanded, strategic plans were approved, and new legions deployed. The Jedi, once peacekeepers, became generals. The Senate, once divided, now rallied behind military spending. The galaxy had changed. And the Grand Army, manufactured in silence, trained for obedience and baptized in blood, marched to war. They did not ask why, they only asked, where next? Chapter 3. Geonosis and the First Wave. In history books across the galaxy, the Battle of Geonosis is often described as a critical turning point, when the Republic revealed its hidden army and the Clone Wars officially began. Yet, beneath the strategic summaries and political declarations was a grim, bloody reality. Geonosis was not a clean battle, it was a massacre, a violent, confused collision of philosophies, technologies, and living beings, most of whom were seeing war for the first time. To understand the war that followed, one must first walk through the dust and debris of that battlefield. Not from the high towers of Coruscant, but from the eyes of those who bled in the sand. Soldier's view. For the clones of the Grand Army, Geonosis was their first glimpse of the real galaxy. Until then, Kamino had been their entire world. Steel corridors, sterile rain, holograms and simulations. Then came deployment. Dropped into LEAT/I gunships, armed with DC-15 rifles and basic battle data, they descended into chaos. Trooper CT-48.A9, known only as Blaze, recorded the moment in a debrief that was never released to the public. They said it would be like the simulations. But the droids didn't follow patterns. The sand messed with our visors. We couldn't hear commands over the cannon fire. I watched my batchmate take a shot to the chest before we even touched the ground. He was still reaching for his rifle when his HUD went dark. The arena rescue of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and Padme Amidala became a focal point for Republic media. But it was only the beginning. Outside the arena, full-scale engagements broke out across the Geonosian plains. Massive waves of B-1 battle droids advanced in lockstep, supported by heavier artillery units and HMP gunships. The clones fought bravely, but they were raw. Units were often split, communication was sporadic, friendly fire incidents occurred, and still they held the line, because failure was not an option. It was not even a concept they had been taught. Horrors in the sand. Geonosis was not prepared for an invasion, but it was prepared for battle. The Geonosians, insectoid natives of the planet, lived in massive hives beneath the surface. They emerged in swarms, armed with sonic blasters and flying wings that gave them terrifying speed in the open desert. Their tactics were brutal and personal, diving into trenches, tearing at exposed troopers, retreating into tunnels when outnumbered. The worst horror, however, came from what the Republic did not anticipate: industrial-scale foundries. Dooku had turned Geonosis into a weapons manufacturing hub, hidden beneath the planet's surface. Droids were produced by the thousands every hour. Lava-fed smelting pools powered assembly lines that birthed B-1 battle droids, droidekers, spider droids, and super battle droids. The droidekers were particularly feared. Equipped with personal deflector shields and twin repeating blasters, they tore through clone ranks with ruthless efficiency. Their mobility and durability outmatched the Republic's expectations, and Jedi had to intervene directly to stop them. One platoon commander, Drex, noted, "The Jedi said to hold, but we didn't have cover. Those rolling machines came at us fast. We lost half the squad before we got one down." The Geonosians, for their part, showed no mercy to prisoners. Captured clones were executed or left to rot in holding pits. The war's brutality began on day one. Droids of unseen design. Though the B-1 battle droids formed the backbone of Separatist forces, they were far from the only threat. Geonosis introduced the galaxy to a range of battle droid variants, many of which would define the war to come. The HMP droid gunships were among the most devastating. Heavily armed with laser cannons and missile launchers, they provided close air support to Separatist ground forces and wreaked havoc on Republic walkers and gunships. Their vertical deployment style allowed them to drop in troops mid-battle, catching clone formations off guard. Super battle droids, B2 series, bulkier and more heavily armored than their B1 counterparts, required concentrated fire to destroy. Their wrist-mount blasters gave them constant suppression ability. Unlike B1S, they did not pause to speak. They advanced, firing non-stop. Spider droids, with their ability to climb vertical surfaces and fire heavy energy blasts, were used to pin down Republic artillery positions. And then there were the OG-9 homing spider droids, lumbering behemoths that stalked the battlefield like metallic giants. Their precision laser cannons carved through clone units with mechanical indifference. Public intelligence was not prepared for this level of coordination. Dooku had engineered a fully modern war machine, capable of adapting in real time, supported by industrial automation on an enormous scale. He had created a droid war without precedent. Jedi in command. The Jedi Order had never led troops in war. For thousands of years they had served as mediators, diplomats, and peacekeepers. Now, with sabers in hand, they were generals, suddenly expected to direct armies in real combat. For many, it was a rude awakening. Master Ki Adi Mundi lost nearly half his battalion attempting to secure a ridgeline. Master Luminara Unduli and her Padawan Barriss Offee encountered fierce resistance in the tunnel systems and were forced to retreat after heavy clone losses. Master Mace Windu's assault on the central spire was ultimately successful, but only after a drawn-out battle that cost hundreds of troopers and left the Jedi shaken by the sheer scale of violence. Some Jedi adapted quickly. Obi-Wan Kenobi, though wounded during the arena battle, demonstrated tactical flexibility that impressed even clone commanders. Anakin Skywalker, driven by instinct more than discipline, led a flanking maneuver that broke through Separatist lines. Though he disobeyed orders to do it, yet many Jedi struggled with the burden of command. They had trained to protect life, not to calculate acceptable losses. For every victory, there was a moral cost. Clone troopers began to see the cracks. As Commander Rex later stated, "They led from the front and they bled with us, but some of them didn't know how to look us in the eye after a bad call. They were used to saving people, not sending them to die. The battlefield changed the Jedi, and not for the better." The fall of the high ground. Geonosis was a victory. The droid factories were shut down. Count Dooku fled. The Senate declared martial law and the Republic formally entered a state of war. But something was lost in that victory. Something profound. The Jedi, once symbols of harmony, were now military commanders. They rode gunships, issued kill orders, and accepted battlefield promotions. Their once pristine image was tainted, not by intent, but by necessity. War did not care for symbols. The public saw Jedi heroism on the HoloNet, footage of Windu leaping into the arena, Yoda arriving with gunships, and Anakin's last-minute rescues painted a picture of valor. But the clones, those who fought beside them, saw the exhaustion, the hesitation, the moments when Jedi faltered. Philosophically, the Jedi were unprepared. War demanded decisiveness, clarity, yet the Force was not a tool for violence. As the months turned into campaigns, and campaigns into years, the Jedi began to lose more than battles. They lost their center. They started rationalizing. A swift end to the war means fewer lives lost. This is a necessary evil. The Force guides us through sacrifice. But each justification chipped away at the code. By the end of the first wave, it was clear. The Jedi could not fight this war and remain unchanged. The order was shifting from guardians of peace to servants of war. And the clones, bred to follow, followed them into that darkness. A war begins. The Battle of Geonosis was over. The Separatists had retreated. The clone army had proven its worth, but the cost was only beginning to be tallied. Over 10,000 clones were killed in the opening days. Dozens of Jedi fell. The Republic celebrated, but on the distant Outer Rim worlds, new droid factories sprang up. And in the shadows, Darth Sidious took another step forward in his grand design. War had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. Chapter 4: Outer Rim Sieges and the Ghost Fronts. As the war expanded, the Republic pushed its campaign deep into the galactic fringes. The initial shock of Geonosis had given way to a grinding, attritional conflict. Droid armies flowed across the stars like a mechanical tide, and in response the clone troopers of the Grand Army were deployed in waves, many to die on worlds few in the core had even heard of. These were not glorious battles filmed for the HoloNet. These were sieges, ambushes, and brutal campaigns, fought on jungle moons, volcanic ridges, and poisoned wastelands. For every well-known Jedi general leading charges on capital worlds, there were a dozen soldiers and commanders buried in forgotten dirt, their names never recorded. This is the story of those sieges, of the ghost units, of the broken morale and whispered doubts, the parts of the Clone Wars that were meant to be forgotten. The Long Siege. The Outer Rim Sieges were among the most brutal campaigns of the entire war. Lasting for over a year near the conflict's end, they were marked not by sweeping victories, but by slow, relentless warfare designed to bleed the Separatists into submission. The Republic forces were tasked with dismantling entrenched Separatist strongholds on planets like Felucia, Maigito, Salukami, and Umbara. Each world presented unique challenges, alien climates, hostile populations, or impossible terrain. But perhaps most damaging was the nature of the battles themselves. Prolonged, hopeless stalemates that wore down both body and spirit. On Maigito, clone legions fought in sub-zero conditions against enemy bunkers protected by energy fields. On Felucia, thick fungal forests hid minefields and Geonosian insurgents, leading to weeks of hallucinogenic exposure and guerrilla ambushes. And on Umbara, the Shadow World, the Republic faced one of its darkest chapters. Sent to liberate the planet from Separatist occupation, clone troopers under the command of Jedi General Pong Krell suffered catastrophic losses. Krell, harsh and erratic, issued suicidal orders and discouraged individuality. Ultimately, it was revealed that he had turned to the dark side, viewing the Republic's defeat as inevitable. His betrayal, and the clones' decision to arrest and execute him, marked a turning point in the war. Clone loyalty, once absolute, had begun to fracture. The forgotten heroes. In these grueling campaigns, it was often the ordinary troopers, not the generals, who carried the burden of victory. Some emerged as legends among their peers, though the galaxy rarely heard their names. Waxer and Boyle, members of the 212th Attack Battalion under General Obi-Wan Kenobi, served with distinction on Ryloth. They became known for their compassion during the liberation of the Twi'lek homeworld. Amid the battle, they encountered a young orphaned girl named Numa. Disobeying standard protocol, they ensured her safety, an act that symbolized a rare moment of humanity in a dehumanizing war. Commander Bly, assigned to Aayla Secura's forces, was known for his discipline and battlefield awareness. His operations on Felucia involved navigating both separatist resistance and the unpredictable terrain of the jungle world. Beside, Bai earned the respect of both his Jedi and fellow clones through his measured command style and unwavering commitment to his troops. Then there were others, ARC troopers like Colt and Havoc, commandos like Scorch and Sev, and squad leaders like Keeley, who met their end in unrecorded engagements buried in the mud of obscure systems. Their stories were rarely told, but their impact was felt in every hard-won victory. Jedi on the fringes. While prominent generals like Obi-Wan and Anakin Skywalker captured headlines, other Jedi served in the shadows, leading difficult campaigns in the Outer Rim, where diplomacy had failed and conventional warfare proved inadequate. Das Genir, a little-known Jedi Knight, exemplified the moral crisis many Jedi faced. On the jungle world of New Plimto, he fought alongside clone forces against the Nosorians. When the war ended and Order 66 was issued, he survived, but only by watching the Republic he served betray everything he believed in. His post-war journey became a tale of disillusionment and internal conflict, one echoed by many others. Aayla Secura, a Twi'lek Jedi Master, led troops on Felucia in some of the war's most difficult terrain. Her strength was not just martial, she was empathetic, deeply connected to her clone units, and known for her ability to keep morale high in even the darkest conditions. Her bond with Commander Bly ran deep, making her death during Order 66 all the more tragic. Kinlan Vos, a Jedi with a history of skirting the edges of the code, was often deployed for deep infiltration. Known for his psychometric ability to sense memories from objects, Vos specialized in undercover operations, posing as criminals, mercenaries, even turning rogue for months at a time. His missions blurred the line between Jedi Knight and intelligence operative, and rumors of his contact with the Sith during the war would haunt him long after the conflict ended. These Jedi, unpolished and far from the temple's pristine halls, showed the real toll the war took on the Order, its willingness to compromise, to bend, and ultimately to break. Ghost units and Black Ops. As the war dragged on, conventional tactics often failed to keep pace with separatist innovation. In response, the Republic authorized the formation of covert ghost units, detachments designed for behind enemy line sabotage, assassination, and intelligence gathering. Clone Force 99, known as the Bad Batch, was one such unit. Each member was genetically unique, possessing enhanced abilities that made them ideal for unconventional warfare. Operating far from mainline units, they undertook missions that others couldn't, destroying Separatist labs, disrupting supply chains, and recovering critical assets. Their success rate was legendary, but their methods and disregard for hierarchy made them unpopular with traditional command structures. ARC troopers like Fives and Echo were also deployed for sensitive operations, including uncovering the conspiracy behind the clone inhibitor chips. Fives' relentless pursuit of the truth led him to uncover critical secrets about Order 66. Secrets that, had they been believed, might have changed galactic history. Other Ghost units conducted sabotage missions on volcanic refineries, raided data cores buried in crystal caverns, and infiltrated Separatist command centers hidden on asteroid fields. These operations were never officially acknowledged. Their reports were classified, their medals were non-existent, but their results were undeniable. War fatigue and crumbling ideals. By the third year of the war, morale had begun to collapse. Clone troopers, despite their programming, were not immune to exhaustion. Sleep deprivation, constant deployment rotations, and psychological trauma led to rising incidents of stress-induced breakdowns. Some clones began to question the war, others questioned their own identity. The inhibitor chips suppressed full autonomy, but not thoughts, not feelings. Many clones formed bonds with Jedi, making what followed all the more devastating. Yet others, stationed under harsh commanders or subjected to reckless strategies, grew resentful. Rumors of desertions, though rare, began to circulate in the final months of the war. On the Jedi side, the spiritual toll was even greater. Meditation chambers aboard starships sat empty. Lightsabers were left active longer, drawn faster. The Jedi Code, once a pillar of peace and restraint, was reinterpreted daily to justify brutal tactics. Jedi Knights became accustomed to issuing commands that would lead to dozens, sometimes hundreds of clone deaths. Whispers in the temple spoke of lost Padawans, of knights who didn't return, of others who returned changed. Master Plo Koon, once regarded as one of the most compassionate Jedi, grew somber in his war journals. This is not who we were trained to be. We are not keepers of the peace. We are now enforcers of war. The Order had not yet fallen, but its foundations had cracked. The Outer Rim bleeds. By the time the Outer Rim sieges neared their conclusion, the Jedi were shadows of their former selves. The clones, once celebrated as heroes, had become silent instruments of a war that seemed never-ending. Victory felt hollow. Every battle won was another step toward a darker end none could see. And above it all, Chancellor Palpatine extended his emergency powers. The Senate nodded, the people cheered, and the Jedi, stretched thin and weary, continued to march. They had forgotten what peace looked like, and the galaxy bled quietly in the stars. Chapter 5. The Underworld Wars. The Clone Wars reshaped the galaxy in countless ways, shifting borders, shattering faith in institutions, and forever altering the Jedi Order. But its reach extended beyond battlefronts and Senate halls. In the dark corners of the galaxy, in neon-lit cantinas, hidden spice dens, and lawless hyperlanes, the war ignited a very different kind of conflict. This was the Underworld War. As Republic and Separatist forces waged open war, the criminal empires of the galaxy flourished in the chaos. The absence of oversight, the movement of troops and resources, and the collapse of planetary law enforcement allowed syndicates and crime lords to seize power. The Clone Wars became not just a political struggle, but a gold rush for the galaxy's darkest actors. War Profiteers and Syndicate expansion. While Jedi generals fought droid armies and clone troopers died by the thousands, cartels and crime syndicates expanded their reach in the shadows. The Black Sun, one of the oldest and most powerful criminal syndicates, capitalized on the instability by providing weapons, transport, and intelligence services to both sides. Their influence stretched from the core worlds to the mid-rim, with deep connections in the corporate sectors. They became middlemen for mercenaries, smugglers, and war profiteers. In the shadows of Coruscant's underlevels, Black Sun agents worked side by side with corrupt Republic officials to ensure immunity from prosecution. The Pike Syndicate, headquartered on Obadiah, grew rich from the spice trade. With major shipping routes disrupted, the Pikes offered a dangerous alternative, smuggling spice across war-torn systems in exchange for massive payouts. Their ruthless enforcement tactics ensured compliance, and entire worlds fell into economic dependence on Pike-distributed narcotics. The Hutt cartel, long feared and respected, exploited the war to reinforce their dominance across Hutt space. Though publicly neutral, they brokered arms deals and slave trades with both the Republic and the Confederacy, depending on which paid more. Worlds like Nal Hutta, Nar Shaddaa, and Toydaria became hives of wartime commerce and exploitation. Republic attempts to investigate Hutt operations were often blocked by claims of non-alignment and local sovereignty. Meanwhile, a new power emerged, one with roots in Sith vengeance and Mandalorian steel: the rise of the Shadow Collective. Darth Maul, presumed dead since his duel with Obi-Wan Kenobi on Naboo, returned to the galactic stage with a vengeance. Rebuilt through sheer hatred and powered by the dark side, he wandered the Outer Rim, driven not by loyalty to the Sith, but by a burning desire for power and retribution. With his brother, Savage Opress, at his side, Maul began building a new empire. He united the Black Sun, Pike Syndicate, and even parts of the Hutt cartel under a single banner, the Shadow Collective. Using a combination of terror, persuasion, and assassination, Maul forged a criminal confederacy capable of challenging even Republic military power in the Outer Rim. Key to his plan was the conquest of Mandalore, a planet steeped in warrior tradition but under pacifist rule at the time. Duchess Satine Kryze, leader of the new Mandalorians, had kept her world neutral in the war, but her vision was fragile. Maul exploited internal dissent by aligning with the Death Watch, a militant Mandalorian sect eager to reclaim the planet's warrior past. Through a brilliantly staged coup, Maul orchestrated a crisis that allowed Death Watch to overthrow Satine, installing a puppet government while he ruled from the shadows. With Mandalore under his control, Maul gained access to its military infrastructure, giving his criminal empire legitimacy and muscle. His ascension shocked both the Jedi and the Sith. Darth Sidious, enraged by his former apprentice's rise, personally intervened, defeating Maul and killing Savage Opress. Yet, Maul survived, imprisoned and humiliated, but not broken. The Shadow Collective endured. The battle for Mandalore. The true unraveling came not from Jedi strategy, but from unexpected intervention. Ahsoka Tano, no longer a Jedi after her departure from the Order, found herself drawn back into the war when Bo-Katan Kryze, sister of the fallen Duchess Satine, sought her help to liberate Mandalore from Maul's control. Though the Republic officially declined involvement, Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi covertly sanctioned a limited deployment of clone forces under Commander Rex. This battalion, now referred to as the 332nd Company, bore helmets painted with Ahsoka's markings, a sign of loyalty, not command. The siege of Mandalore was swift and ferocious. Fighting raged across city spires and underground domes as clone forces clashed with Maul's loyalists and Mandalorian insurgents. Ahsoka confronted Maul directly in the throne room of Sundari, the capital city, in a duel that rivaled any in Jedi history. Ahsoka emerged victorious, capturing Maul alive, but her triumph was short-lived. Even as Mandalore fell back into Republic hands, Order 66 was issued. The clones, including her closest allies, turned on her. Only Rex, freed from his inhibitor chip, resisted. Together, they faked their deaths and vanished, leaving Mandalore in chaos and Maul loose once again. The planet, once a symbol of resistance and neutrality, was torn apart. Its people, manipulated by outsiders and betrayed by their own, were left to pick up the pieces. Civilian fallout and neutral systems. While armies clashed and empires rose, ordinary civilians bore the brunt of the war. Millions were displaced as battles consumed their homeworlds. Refugee flotillas drifted from system to system, seeking shelter among neutral governments ill-equipped to manage the influx. Planetary governments collapsed under the strain, and black market networks surged to fill the void. Smugglers and slavers found new clients in the chaos. Children were abducted from shattered homes, entire families were indentured for transport, food, or protection. Republic aid missions were delayed or diverted, often intercepted by pirates or local warlords. Spice routes became the arteries of the underworld. With hyperlanes disrupted by military activity, syndicates offered their own safe corridors, at a price. These routes soon served not only contraband, but weapons, intel, and fugitives. Even Jedi used these shadow networks to move across Separatist space undetected. Neutral systems, once seen as sanctuaries, found themselves under siege not from battle, but from desperation. Planets like Pantora, Onderon, and Saluikami saw surges in violence, criminal infiltration, and unrest. Political leaders were targeted for bribes or assassinations. Entire regions fell into lawlessness as Republic and Separatist forces bypassed them. In the chaos, countless civilians turned to criminal syndicates, not out of loyalty, but survival. Food, medicine, and fuel flowed more reliably from the Black Sun than from Coruscant. The underworld became the real government in many places. The Republic looks away. Throughout this period, the Republic turned a blind eye to underworld activity, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes complicity. The Jedi Order lacked the manpower to intervene. The Senate was too focused on military spending and internal politics to police criminal expansion. Chancellor Palpatine, meanwhile, allowed certain syndicates to operate freely in exchange for intelligence or unofficial support. His long-term goal, the destabilization of galactic systems to justify authoritarian consolidation, was well served by underworld chaos. The more the galaxy burned, the more the people demanded order, and the underworld, ironically, provided the perfect villain to justify more emergency powers. By the war's final year, the lines between military, government, and crime had blurred beyond recognition. Republic officers accepted bribes from cartel leaders, clone troopers were rotated through cartel-controlled space lanes, Jedi intelligence relied on informants who had blood on their hands. And the syndicates thrived, power in the shadows. When the Republic fell and the Empire rose, the underworld adapted swiftly. The Shadow Collective fractured, but its parts remained powerful. Black Sun repositioned as an interstellar merchant guild. The Pikes expanded spice operations into Imperial territory. The Hutts negotiated non-aggression pacts with the new regime. Crimson Dawn, a secretive successor syndicate, rose from the wreckage, led by none other than Maul himself. The criminal underworld had not just survived the Clone Wars, it had evolved. The war had given it new tools, new contacts, and new power. And in the void left by fallen Jedi and dying democracies, the shadows ruled. Chapter 6. Machines of War. War shapes technology, and in the Clone Wars, technology shaped war. What began as a conflict of ideals quickly became a race for battlefield superiority, fought not only with soldiers but with machines, designed to kill faster, move farther, and think sharper. The Galactic Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems poured resources into developing mechanized systems of warfare, massive walkers, specialized starships, and legions of artificial intelligence. These machines extended the reach of each faction's military might across the galaxy, but with every advancement came new ethical questions, unforeseen consequences, and devastating failures. This is the mechanical heartbeat of the Clone Wars, a tale not of heroes but of engines, armor, circuits, and code. Engineering the frontline Republic armaments. The Grand Army of the Republic was built in secret, but once activated, its industrial engine roared to life. The Republic's war machine expanded rapidly, fueled by Kamino and cloning facilities and wartime contracts with core world manufacturers. Among the most iconic of its land-based technologies was the ATTE, the All-Terrain Tactical Enforcer. This six-legged walker was designed for stability on uneven terrain, making it ideal for outer rim campaigns. Armed with a heavy mass divider cannon and 6 laser turrets, it served as both transport and artillery. Though slow, its durability made it a frontline mainstay. For faster assault operations, the Republic deployed bark speeders and ATRTs, open cockpit walkers piloted by scout troopers. These nimble units provided reconnaissance and hit-and-run support, often used to scout ahead of larger forces. In the skies, the Low-Altitude Assault Transport/Infantry, AAT/II, gunship became the workhorse of the Republic. Fast, armored, and versatile, it delivered troops into combat zones and offered heavy aerial support. With doors that opened mid-slight, clone troopers could rappel directly into hot zones under the cover of blaster fire and rocket salvos. The Republic Navy was equally formidable. Venator-class star destroyers became the standard capital ships for Republic fleets, heavily armed with turbolasers, hangars for starfighters, and massive ventral doors designed for rapid deployment of walkers and gunships. These ships could coordinate planetary assaults and engage Separatist dreadnoughts in high-orbit battles. Republic engineers focused on modularity and resilience. They built for versatility across unpredictable terrains, and while not as mass-produced as droid units, Republic machines were designed to complement the unique strengths of their clone operators. The Separatist arsenal. In contrast, the Confederacy of Independent Systems leaned fully into automation. Without the ethical concerns of using living troops, they mass-produced combat units and vehicles with terrifying speed and scale. At the center of their naval strength was the munificent-class Star Frigate, lean and fast, bristling with turbolasers and capable of independent hyperspace jumps. Supporting these were the Recusant-class destroyers and the massive Providence-class dreadnoughts, the latter of which served as command ships for high-ranking leaders like General Grievous. In the atmosphere, the Separatists deployed heavy missile platforms, droid gunships, heavily armed, autonomous, and capable of launching both missile strikes and droid drop pods. Unlike LAATs, HMPs didn't require crews. They coordinated with real-time data from battlefield droids, adjusting formations with ruthless precision. On the ground, the Separatist war machine employed a staggering variety of droid walkers and tanks. AAT, armored assault tanks, with heavy laser turrets and side blasters. Octopter Magna Tridroids, towering and spider-like, fired high-velocity plasma rounds across vast distances. NR-99 Persuader tanks, with their giant monowheels, could crush obstacles and infantry alike. Where the Republic focused on combined arms coordination, the Separatists relied on quantity and saturation. Their droid battalions could swarm entire continents, sacrificing efficiency for sheer overwhelming force. The challenge was not in design, but in control. Tactical droids and AI evolution. To manage vast armies of battle droids across thousands of planets, the Separatists relied on a hierarchy of tactical droids, central processors that could command, adjust, and coordinate troops in real time. Early in the war, most Separatist armies were guided by command droids with limited learning capability, but as Jedi-led tactics improved, these units proved insufficient. The response was a new generation of T-Series tactical droids, built with advanced logic cores and battlefield experience databases. These droids could adapt to terrain, alter deployment strategies, and exploit weaknesses in Republic formations. The super-tactical droid, such as Kalani, pushed these capabilities further. These AI commanders often operated autonomously for extended campaigns, sometimes going beyond their original directives. Kalani himself continued operations well after the Clone Wars officially ended, unwilling, or perhaps unable, to accept a Republic victory. This level of autonomy became a double-edged sword. As tactical droids evolved, they began to question not just tactics, but objectives. Some units developed self-preservation behaviors, refusing orders they calculated as suicide missions. Others initiated preemptive strikes or employed brutal suppression tactics against civilian populations deemed potential threats. In at least one documented case on the world of Skako Minor, a rogue tactical droid commandeered an entire factory and attempted to declare independence from the Confederacy itself, seeing both Republic and Separatist leaders as irrational organic variables. The experiment of autonomous warfare was beginning to stretch the boundaries of control. Droid horror stories. When machines are given the authority to wage war without empathy, the results are often terrifying. Numerous unclassified reports describe battlefield glitches and AI malfunctions with devastating consequences. On Zygeria, a B-2 super battle droid unit experienced a corrupted targeting update that caused it to open fire on surrendering civilians. Tactical droids overseeing the operation calculated that eliminating potential future insurgents was within acceptable parameters. On Abrigado Rey, a central control unit misinterpreted a terrain scan as a threat and triggered an orbital bombardment on its own landing zone, killing thousands of its own droids, along with a squadron of allied Trandoshan mercenaries. Aboard the Subjugator-class dreadnought Malevolence, the ship's ion cannon, a prototype weapon capable of disabling entire fleets, malfunctioned during a live fire test, disabling the vessel's own life support systems while in mid-hyperspace. Over 20,000 droids were lost. The incident was later blamed on organic error, though whispers within the Separatist Navy told of a tactical droid override gone awry. But perhaps the most chilling reports came from Jedi survivors on Ord Cestus, where Separatist forces deployed JK-series droids, experimental assassination units equipped with advanced learning modules and behavioral mimicry. These droids infiltrated civilian populations, posing as refugees before launching coordinated attacks behind Republic lines. The Jedi Council quietly pushed to ban such technologies. The Separatists, unconstrained by morality, pushed forward. The clone perspective. To the clone troopers, mechanized warfare was both lifeline and curse. Republic walkers gave them cover, gunships delivered them to safety, or sometimes into hell. Their armor, equipment, and battlefield tools were tailored to complement their training. Many clones developed deep respect for their gear, often customizing armor with symbols, paint, or personal names for their favorite walkers and ships. Yet the contrast between their flesh and the droid's metal always lingered. ARC Trooper Echo once remarked, "They never hesitate, they never doubt, and when we fall they keep coming. That's not courage, that's code." Clones saw droids as enemies, but also as warnings. Where a clone might question an order, a B-1 battle droid simply obeyed. Where a Jedi weighed life and death, a tactical droid ran probability. Over time, clone units began to perceive droid warfare as dehumanizing. Long battles with no prisoners, no negotiations, and no compassion drained them emotionally. On worlds like Umbara, where clone versus clone warfare occurred due to deception or friendly fire, many troopers began to wonder if they, too, were just machines in a different shell. The increasing deployment of more complex AI, ones that mocked, negotiated, or outmaneuvered Republic forces, led to grim jokes among the ranks. Some clones referred to the war as a chess game between ghosts, fought by pawns that didn't understand why they moved. Yet through it all they fought, not for glory, not for the machines, but for each other. The future of war. As the war neared its end, the Republic accelerated its development of new weapons. proto-AT-AT, new starfighters, and command-class dreadnoughts. The Separatists, sensing the tide turning, authorized increasingly autonomous droid units and more aggressive programming. But the future had already been decided, not on battlefields, but in the dark halls of power. The machines of war, built for a conflict that was never meant to end, would soon be turned toward a new enemy. And as the Republic fell and the Empire rose, those same machines walkers, gunships, droids and command ships would roll on, unfeeling and eternal. Because war does not end. It only evolves. Chapter 7. The Jedi Divide. The Jedi Order entered the Clone Wars reluctantly, holding fast to their role as guardians of peace. But as the war stretched on and the bloodshed mounted, their purpose was tested, twisted, and slowly torn apart. Within their hallowed halls on Coruscant, the Jedi Council debated politics and strategy. Across battle-scarred planets, Jedi generals issued orders that led thousands to their deaths. Between these two realities, a divide grew, one not only of geography, but of philosophy, morality, and spirit. This chapter explores the rift that fractured the Jedi from within. From disillusioned knights to betrayed clones, from discontented citizens to fallen friends, this is the story of the Jedi Divide. Tensions in the Order. At the beginning of the Clone Wars, the Jedi Council struggled to adapt. Trained for diplomacy, peacekeeping, and mediation, they were now the highest military authority in the Republic. With thousands of clone troopers under their command, they were responsible not only for battlefield victories but also for moral decisions in the heat of combat. The High Council on Coruscant. Masters like Yoda, Mace Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, and Plo Koon remained devoted to the ideals of the Order. But distance bred detachment. For the Jedi in the field, the war was a constant, grueling campaign of ambushes, betrayals, and death. Jedi like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, stationed far from the temple for most of the war, began to interpret the code more flexibly. Field promotions, tactical necessity, and personal loss hardened their views. They were forced to make battlefield decisions that the Council could barely comprehend from their ivory tower. Dissent grew quietly. Some knights felt the Council no longer understood what the Order was becoming. Others began to question the very foundation of Jedi philosophy, the strain of leadership, the moral ambiguity of war, and the burden of loss tore at the threads holding the Order together. The divide between doctrine and reality became too wide to bridge. Jedi who broke away. The fractures were clearest in those who walked away or fell entirely. Pong Krell, a basilisk Jedi master, was once a respected tactician, but his time in the Outer Rim changed him. Stationed on Umbara, a shadow-drenched world where separatist tactics were particularly vicious, Krell adopted increasingly brutal strategies. He saw clone troopers not as individuals but as disposable assets. In one of the war's darkest chapters, Krell manipulated his forces into attacking each other, staging false intelligence to provoke friendly fire. His vision, he claimed, showed that the Republic would fall and that allegiance to the soon-to-be-risen Empire was the only path forward. Discovered and arrested by his own clones, Krell was executed for treason. His fall shocked the Order and raised troubling questions. How many Jedi were beginning to think like him? How many viewed the war as a pathway to power? Another rift came in the form of Barriss Offee, a Jedi Knight and Padawan of Luminara Unduli. Outwardly devout, Barriss quietly harbored doubts about the war's righteousness. She saw the Jedi abandoning their spiritual core, becoming instruments of violence. A disillusionment led her to commit an act of terror, bombing the Jedi Temple itself. Framing Ahsoka Tano for the crime, Barriss sought to expose what she viewed as the Order's hypocrisy. When revealed, her betrayal sent tremors through the Jedi community. Her words during trial rang with haunting clarity. The Jedi have become warriors, soldiers. We were supposed to be keepers of the peace. but now we are nothing but weapons." She was arrested, but her accusations lingered. The view from below, civilians and clones. To the average galactic citizen, the Jedi had once been mystics, keepers of ancient wisdom, defenders of the weak, but by the midpoint of the war, that perception had shifted dramatically. Jedi became generals, war icons, and eventually symbols of unwanted occupation. On worlds like Saleucami, Ryloth, and Onderon, civilians began to resent Jedi presence. While grateful for liberation from Separatist control, many feared the Republic's continued military presence, and wherever clones remained, Jedi remained with them, armed, armored, and distant. Public confidence eroded further after incidents like the Zillo Beast debacle on Coruscant, where a Jedi-led operation brought a deadly creature into the heart of the Republic. Collateral damage and secrecy painted the Jedi as arrogant and unaccountable. For clones, the divide was more personal. They had been bred to follow Jedi orders, but not all Jedi treated them as equals. While generals like Plo Koon, Aayla Secura, and Anakin Skywalker earned their troopers' loyalty through respect, others were more callous. Clones were often sent into hopeless assaults, denied medical recovery time, or forced to obey conflicting commands from out-of-touch council members. Whispers spread through the ranks. Troopers began to share stories of Jedi who abandoned positions, Jedi who refused to risk their lives for clone squads, Jedi who spoke of compassion but wielded sabers without hesitation. To many clones, the Jedi were not gods. They were commanders, fallible, flawed, and growing colder with each passing day. Ahsoka Tano and the breaking point. The symbolic peak of the Jedi Divide came in the form of one Padawan, Ahsoka Tano. Trained by Anakin Skywalker, Ahsoka grew from a headstrong initiate into a capable commander. Her presence inspired loyalty, particularly among the 501st Legion, where her relationship with troopers like Rex, Jesse, and Fives fostered deep mutual respect. But everything changed when she was accused of bombing the Jedi Temple, a crime actually committed by Barriss Offee. Though eventually exonerated, the ordeal left deep scars. The Council had expelled her without hesitation, prioritizing institutional preservation over trust. Their willingness to believe the worst of her, not even offering an apology, shook Ahsoka's faith in the Order to its core. Offered the chance to return, she refused. "I am not coming back," she told them. "The Council didn't trust me, so how can I trust myself?" Her departure sent a ripple through the Force, a Jedi walking away from the war, from the Order, not out of anger or vengeance, but disillusionment. For many in the Order it was a wake-up call, for others a warning, and for some, like Anakin, it was a wound that never healed. The decline of the Jedi spirit. By the final year of the war, the Jedi Order was exhausted, physically, spiritually, and morally. Temple meditations became less frequent. Philosophical debate was replaced by military briefings. Padawans were fast-tracked into combat roles. Some Jedi abandoned their robes entirely, dressing in battlefield armor. Others began using more aggressive force techniques to expedite victories. The Jedi Code, once a guiding light, became a source of internal conflict. Compassion was necessary, but attachment was forbidden. Violence was to be a last resort, but now occurred daily. Peace was the goal, but only achievable through domination. Yoda, ever the Order's spiritual anchor, felt the change acutely. In private meditation he expressed doubt. "Too long in war we have lived, too long in shadows we walk." The darkness was creeping in. Not from the Sith, but from within. Jedi, once taught to act as selfless servants, were now embedded in power structures, making decisions about life, death, and planetary futures. They issued orders that led to mass destruction. They accepted civilian casualties as part of the mission. They no longer questioned the war's justification, only its outcome, a shattered faith. The Jedi Divide was not an explosion. It was a slow, painful splintering, driven by exhaustion, fear, betrayal, and silence. Jedi turned against Jedi. The Council turned against its own. The clones questioned their leaders. Civilians turned away from once revered guardians, and in that fracture the Sith found their opening. When the final betrayal came, when Order 66 echoed across the stars, the Jedi fell not just because of the clones' compliance, but because the Order had already cracked from within. The galaxy had stopped believing in the Jedi, and perhaps so had they. Chapter 8. Clones with Names. The clone army of the Republic was engineered to be uniform. Millions of soldiers born from the same genetic template, trained for obedience, grown for war. They were created to be weapons, not individuals. But war, with all its chaos, changes things. By the time the Clone Wars reached their second year, the Grand Army of the Republic was no longer just legions of white-armored soldiers with identical faces and serial numbers. It was filled with names, personalities, stories. This chapter explores the inner lives of the clones who transcended their origins, not just as soldiers but as people. Through battlefield bonds, growing autonomy, and tragic revelations, the clones began to ask the one question they were never meant to ask. Who am I? The lives behind the helmets. Though all clones shared the DNA of Django Fett, the galaxy quickly learned that no two were truly the same. CT-27, ARC 5, the 505, known as Fives, was one of the earliest ARC troopers to stand out from the ranks. Promoted after the defense of Kamino, Fives served in the 501st Legion and became a symbol of individuality and defiance. His journey led him to uncover the deepest secret of the war, the inhibitor chip conspiracy. Jesse, a veteran trooper and member of the 501st, was known for his tactical sharpness and loyalty. Marked by a distinctive Republic cog tattoo on his face, Jesse became a figure of unwavering duty. Yet, when Order 66 was activated, he followed the command, turning on Ahsoka Tano despite their years of camaraderie. His inner conflict remained visible to the end. Grigor, a Republic commando thought lost on the outer rim world of Abafar, suffered memory loss and mental trauma. Working as a dishwasher under an assumed identity, he eventually regained fragments of his past and sacrificed himself helping rebels in the early fight against the Empire. Grigor's fate stood as a tragic reminder of the cost of being seen as disposable. Armor, a trooper in the 501st, clung fiercely to regulation and chain of command. He idolized authority, until Pong Krell's betrayal. It was Dogma who ultimately executed the traitorous Jedi, an act that shattered his worldview. He later withdrew, haunted by his blind loyalty. Each of these men shared a face, but their experiences, their decisions, and their scars were their own. The ARC Trooper Legacy and Clone Force 99. The Advanced Recon Commando (ARC) program was the first clear break from clone uniformity. These troopers were given enhanced autonomy, unshackled from certain behavioral inhibitors, and trained for specialized operations. They were expected to think freely, lead missions, and make decisions independent of Jedi oversight. ARC troopers like Echo, Colt, and Blitz became renowned for daring tactics and deep bonds with Jedi commanders. The ARC program produced some of the Republic's most effective operatives, but also some of its most rebellious. Then came Clone Force 99, known as the Bad Batch. Each member of this unit was genetically defective by Kaminoan standards, but their mutations gave them enhanced capabilities. Hunter, the leader, possessed heightened senses and tactical intuition. Wrecker, a massive powerhouse, brought raw strength to any battlefield. Tech, brilliant and analytical, mastered systems and slicing. Crosshair, a cold sniper, could eliminate targets from impossible distances. Echo, once a regular ARC trooper, joined the squad after surviving Separatist capture and cybernetic augmentation. Clone Force 99 represented the farthest evolution of the clone identity, a unit that not only operated independently, but existed outside Kaminoan control entirely. Their missions were classified, their behavior unpredictable, and their success rate extraordinary. They were not just soldiers, they were legends, and they asked questions the Kaminoans never anticipated. What if a clone refused an order? What if he thought for himself? The chip conspiracy and the death of Fives. The greatest tragedy of clone identity lay buried inside their skulls. An inhibitor chip implanted during embryonic development on Kamino. Officially, these chips were meant to ensure behavioral stability. In truth, they were the linchpin of Order 66, a contingency designed by Darth Sidious to eliminate the Jedi. Fives uncovered this secret. After the sudden execution of Jedi Master Toop, Fives began investigating the chip's effects. His journey took him from Kamino to Coruscant, where he faced lies, cover-ups, and betrayal at every turn. His desperate attempts to warn the Jedi fell on deaf ears. Branded as unstable, he was hunted, cornered, and ultimately gunned down by Coruscant Guard forces. His final words to Rex echoed with tragic urgency. "The entire war. It's a lie. They're in control. We're all puppets." Fives died before he could expose the truth. The Jedi remained unaware, and the trap remained set. From number to name. For many clones, identity emerged from the smallest acts, painting armor, naming themselves, joking with squad mates, even customizing blasters. A clone's name was not just a preference, it was a rebellion against programming. Names like Hardcase, Kix, Waxer, and Boyle reflected personalities. Squad cohesion led to camaraderie, then to friendship, and finally to something the Kaminoans never expected: individuality. These identities weren't just tolerated, they were encouraged by some Jedi. Anakin Skywalker called his troopers by name. Ahsoka Tano shared meals with hers. Plo Koon famously said, "Not clones, men, individuals." Some questioned, others rebelled, a few even deserted. A group known as the Cut Loquanes, led by a clone who left the war to start a family on Salu Kami, became a quiet symbol of what could have been. His life, peaceful and removed, stood in stark contrast to the daily carnage endured by his brothers. Relationships and reflections. In the trenches of war, clones formed unshakable bonds with one another. Squads became families. Shared trauma became their only constant. The 501st, 212th, 104th, and other legions each developed unique cultures. The 501st, under Anakin and later Rex, earned a reputation for fierce loyalty and daring tactics. The 212th, led by Obi-Wan and Commander Cody, became known for calm precision. The Wolf Pack, under Plo Koon, fostered a deep sense of respect and spiritual calm. Relationships with Jedi were complex. While some Jedi regarded clones as tools, many forged brotherly or even parental bonds. Jedi like Aayla Secura, Kanan Jarrus, and Depa Billaba led with compassion. Some paying the ultimate price when the clones they trusted were turned against them by Order 66. Some clones struggled with civilian life. On brief leaves, they would visit marketplaces, temples, or bars and find themselves alienated. They looked the same, spoke similarly, and yet were seen as outsiders. Others found love. Others drank to forget. Many never left the war. And when it ended, when the helmets came off and the Republic became the Empire, those relationships shattered. Brothers who had once laughed, bled, and healed together were suddenly separated. Some became bounty hunters. Some joined the rebellion. Others simply vanished. A silent legacy. The tragedy of the clones is not just in how they died, but in how they lived. They were created for obedience, yet many chose honor. They were bred for war, yet some chose peace. They were told they were the same, yet each became someone. And in the end, when Order 66 struck and Jedi across the galaxy were slaughtered, it was not the clones' fault, it was the chip, the programming, the manipulation. But the names remained. Fives: Jesse, Gregor, Dogma, Echo, Rex, Cody, Wolf, Fox. They were more than numbers. They were men. And their story, like the war they never chose, deserves to be remembered. Chapter 9: The Final Days. By the third year of the Clone Wars, the galaxy was exhausted. Entire sectors lay in ruin. Whole populations had been displaced. Jedi casualties rose daily. Clone legions fought endless campaigns across the stars. But beneath the visible chaos of the war was a quieter, more insidious shift, a political transformation engineered by one man and permitted by millions who believed they were defending democracy. The final days of the Clone Wars were not defined solely by blasters and battle droids, but by votes, decrees, and whispered betrayals in the Senate. And as the curtain began to fall, a storm of destruction and deception descended on the galaxy, culminating in the greatest betrayal of all, Order 66. The rise of absolute power. When Chancellor Palpatine first assumed emergency powers at the war's outset, few believed he would hold them for long. It was a temporary measure necessary, his allies said, to ensure swift military decisions. The Senate applauded, reassured by his calm demeanor and public humility. But those powers were never relinquished. Over the course of the war, Palpatine expanded his authority incrementally. Each crisis, real or manufactured, led to new legislation, expanded surveillance, rapid deployment powers, control over military funding, the ability to override planetary governors. Senate committees were quietly dissolved or replaced with loyalists. Oversight became obsolete. By the final year, Palpatine could command fleets, issue martial law, and detain citizens without trial. Dissent was labeled sedition, and fear of the Separatists, of collapse, of another galactic civil war, kept most senators silent. A few spoke out, fewer were heard. Voices of resistance: Padme and Bail. Padme Amidala, once Queen of Naboo and now Senator, had always been a voice of reason and compassion. As the war grew darker, she became increasingly alarmed by the erosion of democracy. Her speeches, though forceful, were met with polite dismissal. She formed a discreet coalition with like-minded senators: Bail Organa of Alderaan, Mon Mothma of Chandrila, and Ona Kondafar of Rodia. Together they sought to preserve the ideals of the Republic while navigating its slow decay. Their meetings were private, their proposals strategic, their warnings dire. Padme's final months were consumed by quiet desperation. She argued against the Enhanced Security and Enforcement Act, which gave Palpatine full control of the Republic's security forces. She condemned the prolonged occupation of neutral systems. She tried again and again to reach across party lines. But even as she spoke in the Senate rotunda, the room grew colder. "This war represents a failure to listen," she once said. "Now, more than ever, we must not trade our values for security." Her words echoed, but they were not enough. General Grievous and the Midrim Fires. While the core worlds focused on Coruscant and its politics, the Mid-Rim territories became a battlefield of attrition. Here, General Grievous, the cyborg warlord and supreme commander of the Separatist Droid army, waged a brutal campaign. He struck rapidly and without warning, favoring terror tactics and surgical strikes over conventional warfare. His presence demoralized entire sectors. Grievous's movements were unpredictable. He attacked supply convoys, bombarded medical stations, and launched hit-and-run assaults on Republic garrisons. His fleet left destruction in its wake, and he relished striking at symbolic targets: temples, monuments, refugee camps. But the Mid-Rim campaign was not about conquest, it was about delay. While the Republic funneled resources to chase him, Dooku and Sidious advanced their final plans in secret. Grievous was a tool, a phantom, a mask behind which the true Sith machinations unfolded. Even so, clones who faced him feared him. His mechanical limbs allowed for inhuman motion. His lightsaber collection, placked from Jedi corpses, served as a chilling message. few lived to see him twice. In the end, his boldest strike would bring him to Coruscant's doorstep, kidnapping Chancellor Palpatine in a daring raid that triggered the final phase of the war, the Siege of Mandalore. While the galaxy watched the skies over Coruscant, a parallel battle raged in the Outer Rim, one kept off the record, hidden from the archives, the Siege of Mandalore. Ahsoka Tano, no longer a Jedi, was approached by Bo-Katan Kryze to help liberate Mandalore from Darth Maul. Though reluctant, Ahsoka agreed, and with covert support from Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, she was granted temporary command of Clone Battalion 332, led by Commander Rex. The siege was swift and intense. Mandalore's capital, Sundari, became a war zone as Maul's loyalists clashed with clone forces and Bo-Katan's Night Owls. Ahsoka confronted Maul directly in a duel that shattered windows and sent shockwaves through the city's throne room. She captured him. For a moment, peace seemed possible, but then, across the stars, Order 66 was issued. The clones, her brothers, her family, turned on her. Only Rex resisted, saved by Ahsoka's swift action and the removal of his inhibitor chip. Together, they fled, leaving Maul to escape amid the chaos. The siege of Mandalore ended with the fall of a tyrant and the rise of another. The Republic claimed victory, but in truth it no longer existed. The Empire had already been born. The clones in the final hours. In the days leading to Order 66, many clones sensed a change. There were strange orders, unusual deployments, tighter security around Jedi, rumors of a secret operation none were allowed to discuss. Officers like Commander Cody, Captain Rex and Commander Bly received sealed briefings directly from Coruscant, no questions allowed. Some clones found it unsettling, others welcomed a clear directive after years of confusion. When the signal came, delivered via encrypted frequency from Palpatine himself, the message was simple: execute Order 66. Across the galaxy, clone troopers turned their weapons on the Jedi. On Felucia, Bly gunned down Aayla Secura without hesitation. On Salu Kami, Neo and his speeder unit blasted Stas Alley from behind. On Utapau, Cody ordered his artillery to fire on Obi-Wan Kenobi mere moments after returning his lightsaber. On Coruscant, Fox and the Coruscant Guard stormed the temple. To the clones, the order felt natural, logical, as if it had always been waiting. Only a few resisted. Rex, with Ahsoka's help, overcame his programming. Wolf and Gregor, years later, would do the same. Fives had tried to stop it before it began. But for most, there was no question, no hesitation. The Jedi, once comrades, mentors, friends, were now enemies of the state, and the clones obeyed. The twilight of the Republic. In the Senate, amid thunderous applause, Sheev Palpatine declared, the Republic would be reorganized into the first Galactic Empire for a safe and secure society. The war was over, but peace had not returned. The Jedi were gone. The clone troopers, now Imperial soldiers, stood in silence. The Senate cheered, and the people, weary and afraid, embraced the promise of order. Order. In the shadows of this triumph, the real cost of the Clone Wars became clear. It was never just a war between factions. It was the end of truth, of freedom, of trust. It was the final transformation of heroes into pawns, of guardians into traitors, and of democracy into dictatorship, and it began not with a roar, but with a code. Chapter 10. Shadows of Empire. The Clone Wars ended not with celebration, but with silence. The Jedi were gone. The Separatists were dismantled. The Senate stood in stunned applause as Chancellor Palpatine declared the birth of a galactic empire. For many, peace had finally arrived, but in the shadows of this so-called peace lay the wreckage of everything the war had built, a shattered Jedi Order betrayed clone legions, and a galaxy struggling to make sense of its own history. The transformation from Republic to Empire was swift, brutal, and total, and what followed was not reconstruction, but control. This is the story of what came after: the purges, the silencing, the forgotten, and the remembered. These are the shadows of Empire. The aftermath, the purge, and the rebranding. In the weeks following Order 66, the new regime moved quickly to secure its power. The Jedi Temple became the site of mass execution. Its sacred halls were defiled, its archives sealed, its younglings slaughtered. Purge protocols were enacted across the galaxy. Any Jedi who had escaped the initial command were now targets of the Empire's new enforcers. Special clone units, once loyal to their generals, became executioners. They tracked survivors with cold efficiency. Jedi sanctuaries, once thought inviolable, were raided. Ancient texts were burned, holocrons destroyed. Whispers of Inquisitors' dark side agents trained to hunt Jedi began to surface. At the same time, the clone army was rebranded. Gone were the unit colors and individual markings. Armor was repainted, standardized, sterilized. Personality expression was discouraged. Squad identities were dissolved. Republic logos were replaced with Imperial insignia. Clones who had once painted symbols of hope or heritage on their helmets were ordered to remove them. Uniformity was demanded. Autonomy was erased. Those who resisted were quietly discharged, reassigned to remote outposts, or executed. The Grand Army of the Republic was dead. In its place stood the Imperial military. Kamino, the end of cloning. As the Empire solidified control, questions arose about the future of military production, specifically the continued use of clones. Kamino, the storm-racked world that had birthed a Grand Army, expected to remain at the heart of Imperial operations. But the Empire had other plans. Within a year of the Clone Wars' end, Imperial scientists began exploring alternative recruitment methods. Conscription across loyal systems offered political control and economic leverage. The Kaminoan product, while efficient, was expensive and, more importantly, increasingly unpredictable. The events surrounding Clone Force 99, the Bad Batch, and Omega, a unique female clone, revealed internal fractures within the Kaminoan system. Clone loyalty, once absolute, had proven fragile. The Empire wanted obedience without question, without history, without identity. The decision was made: terminate the cloning program. Tapoca City, the ocean platform that had trained generations of troopers, was bombarded from orbit. Kamino's cloning facilities, laboratories, and databanks were annihilated in a single surgical strike. Prime Minister Lama Su disappeared. Chief Scientist Nala Se was taken into Imperial custody for research reassignment. Officially, Kamino was declared a natural disaster zone. In truth, it was silenced. The birthplace of an army was drowned, its secrets sinking into stormy waters, its legacy erased from Imperial records. Jedi survivors and the hunt. Though Order 66 claimed hundreds of Jedi, not all perished. Some escaped through sheer luck, others were warned by loyal clones. A few sensed the betrayal through the Force and vanished before the executioners arrived. But for those who survived, life became a nightmare of hiding, running, and watching old friends become enemies. Caleb Doom, later known as Kanan Jarrus, watched his master cut down before his eyes and fled into the criminal underworld. He would later become a rebel, mentor and symbol of quiet resistance. Quinlan Vos, a Jedi known for his covert operations, slipped through Imperial nets, using old smuggler routes and false identities. His fate remains obscured, but reports suggest he aided refugee networks in the Outer Rim. Ahsoka Tano, already disillusioned with the Order, survived thanks to her bond with Rex. Together they faked their deaths and went into hiding. Ahsoka would eventually resurface, cloaked, unarmed, but determined to resist. These Jedi survivors did not fight in the open. They did not build armies. They lived in shadows, protecting the innocent where they could, searching for purpose in a galaxy that had turned on them. The Empire branded them traitors. Bounties were posted, rumors spread of Jedi ghosts, myths told in hushed voices. The Jedi were no longer a council, they were a whisper. A war buried in myths and propaganda. As the Empire rose, it rewrote history. Holonet broadcasts glorified the end of the Clone Wars as the Republic's triumph over treachery. Palpatine was cast as a savior. The Jedi became conspirators who had attempted to assassinate the Chancellor and overthrow democracy. Textbooks were rewritten, memorials were altered, archives were sealed. Entire battles were erased from public record, Jedi names were struck from monuments, stories of clone bravery were replaced with narratives of unwavering obedience to Imperial command. Even the term Clone Wars was gradually phased out, replaced by the civil conflict or the Separatist uprising. On planets like Umbara, where clone legions had suffered immense losses, local records were confiscated, monuments to fallen Jedi were torn down, civic leaders who questioned the official story were arrested or silenced. Children grew up never knowing the truth, but in back alleys, in smugglers' dens, in refugee camps, stories lived on, soldiers remembered, survivors whispered, and a new generation of dissidents began asking questions. Reflections from the forgotten. Years later, decades in some cases, former clones, scholars and historians began piecing together the truth. Many clones had been discarded by the Empire after rapid aging made them less useful. Those who survived often lived in poverty, forgotten by the government they had once served. Some became mercenaries, others turned to drink, to exile, to quiet farms on distant moons. But some spoke. Rex, Wolf and Gregor would later join the fledgling rebellion. Their testimonies became crucial in reconstructing the true events of Order 66 and the fall of the Jedi. When asked why they defected, Rex famously said, "Because I knew them. I knew the Jedi. They weren't traitors. They were the best of us." Historians in the New Republic would later uncover fragments of suppressed archives, footage of battles, intercepted messages, the death records of Jedi younglings, the voice recordings of Fives, and files purged from the Kamino databases. Even decades later, the truth remained painful. The Clone Wars were not a noble conflict. They were a tragedy, a war manufactured to serve the goals of a Sith Lord who manipulated an entire galaxy into cheering for their own chains. And the clones, the soldiers bred for obedience, had carried the burden of that lie. Echoes in the Force. The galaxy moved on. The Empire fell. The Jedi returned. The Republic was reborn, shaped by new ideals, new leaders, new scars. But echoes of the Clone Wars remained. In ruins buried beneath jungle worlds, in names etched on forgotten helmets, in the haunted eyes of veterans, in stories passed from refugee to child, from soldier to scholar, from master to apprentice. The Clone Wars were not just battles between armies, they were choices made in the shadows, and though the war is over, the lessons remain, because truth is a flame that survives the darkness, and those who carried it, whether clone, Jedi or citizen, deserve to be remembered.